Welcome back. All right, in this video lesson, we're going to focus on negation introduction and negation elimination. But before we want to move that, I want to say a few things about the rules that we've introduced so far and the rules that we're going to introduce in the next few video lessons. So there's an important statement that you should keep in mind, and the reasons for this will become even more apparent later on in the course. But the important thing for the rules that we've been introducing is that they are truth preserving. So the rules of SD are, this is slow sometimes. Okay. They are truth preserving. So what that means, so if you remember when we first introduced validity, one of the things that was really important was that we never go from true premises to a false conclusion. And remember, we didn't actually even care whether or not the premises are true or not. All we cared about was if they were, right? So maybe as a matter of fact they're false, but all we wanted in our rules was that all we wanted out of validity was that it's truth preserving. That is, if the premises were true, if they were, then they should never take us to a false conclusion. And the rules of SD that we're using are the same thing. So SD, right, our derivation system, it doesn't care. It doesn't give a crap whether or not the assumptions that we've picked are in fact true as a matter of fact, or whether or not they're false. All it basically does is tells you that if you started out with true assumptions, the only things that you can derive are further true things. If you started out with false stuff, well, I can't help you. Garbage in, garbage out. But if you're giving me good stuff, right? So if you're giving me assumptions that are in fact true, then I will ensure that the system or these rules are going to preserve the truth. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind for the why we've selected the particular rules that we are. Because there's lots of rules that you could introduce that, maybe you would find them intuitive, maybe you would not. But the point is they might not be truth preserving. So all the rules that we're picking have this property of being truth preserving. And that's going to include the two new rules that we're going to introduce now, which are negation introduction and negation elimination. Oh, that's a little bit too big. I don't like the way that looks. Let's do this. All right. Okay, so we're going to introduce two new rules. This is negation introduction, and we're also going to talk about negation elimination. Okay, so here's how negation introduction goes. Actually, no, let me start with negation elimination. And these are actually going to turn out to be very similar, so let's start with that. So with negation elimination, we have our main scope line here. And then if we want to derive, there we go, some sentence P. So remember, this is a meta sentence variable right here. Or sorry, this is a sentence in our meta language. This is the meta variable. Okay, so suppose I want to get P. So what I need to do is assume the negation of P. So I'm going to assume that it's not the case. And then the trick is to get a contradiction. What's a contradiction in here? Well, we have something like the sentence Q. And what would contradict Q? Hopefully you'll have guessed this. It's not Q. So we get its negation. So then we have a contradiction, right? We have Q and we have not Q. If on the assumption that we have not P, if we can get a contradiction, Then we can discharge the assumption and we can write P in the next scope line. And I can't remember if I actually said this yet or not, but once we discharge this, this is now closed, right? So remember before we talked about accessibility, where I can't just look from an outside scope line that I can look into here and pull something out. I can't actually do that. But we can do the other direction. So if I was here and we had some other further assumptions, I could pull them in here. Okay, so now that we've discharged that, we can get P, and this subderivation is now closed. Negation introduction is going to be very similar, so let me just do that over here. So here, what we want to do is, so remember what this little arrow right here does. This just says the thing that you can derive once you have a derivation that has this form. So we want to get not P. The way we do that is very similar to negation elimination. We have a subderivation where our auxiliary assumption is, oh, sorry, that's not right. Our auxiliary assumption is just P. And now the idea is the same. That is, we're going to try to get a contradiction by assuming that P. So we get Q somewhere, and then we get not Q. And actually, for our purposes, the order in which you get the Q and the not Q won't matter. So if you get not Q first and then Q, that will be totally fine. I mean, there is a way in which we could get around that by using reiteration to sort of repeat it to get this form. So if we had, for example, not Q up here and then Q, and we were, really, really, really strict, we want to say, nope, it's got to have not Q after Q, then we could just use reiteration here to get not Q. But we're not going to be that strict with the order when it comes to getting a contradiction. Okay, so these are the rules of negation introduction and negation elimination. And notice that they basically have the same. They have very similar forms in the sense that you want to get a contradiction in order to be able to either introduce the negation or actually eliminate it. So maybe let's go through a really simple example. And let me actually just restart this. And let's make, we'll keep this one really, really simple. And, well, actually, yeah, let's do that. Okay. Sorry, I was just looking back. I was going to try to make sure that I use lots of examples that are not from the book, which sometimes is going to be a little harder to do on the fly than other times. But so let's do something that we've already used from some of the rules we had before. So suppose that this is our main scope line, and suppose we assume that, yeah, this will be good. I want to have if A, then B, and suppose we have if B, then D, and we have not D, and suppose we also have M. And what we were going to like to derive, so the thing we want to derive is going to be not A and M. That's what we'd like to derive. Okay, so if we want to get not A, the idea is going to be that we need to derive a contradiction, right? So we want to get not A and then be able to conjoin it with M that we already have out here. So given that we've got a negation here, we need, this whole thing is a conjunction, but one of the conjuncts is the negation. So before we can join M with not A, we need to get not A somewhere. So we notice that since this has a negation, we're going to try to assume the opposite, namely A, and then try to derive a contradiction. So we start out with the auxiliary assumption that A is the case, and what we're going to try to get out of that assumption is not A. And I'm not writing the justifications down yet, I'm just sort of writing out the sort of schematic structure. So the trick now is to try to get some kind of contradiction. And hopefully you can sort of see that just by looking here. So we have something, we have not D, right? We have another negation here. And we can try to get a contradiction with that, and the place where we see something that would contradict not D is right here, the consequent of this conditional. D here would, if we got D out, we would have a contradiction with not D. And to get D out, thinking backwards, we need to actually get A so that we can use conditional elimination. And we see that B is over here as a consequence of this. And if we could get B out of here, the way we would need to do that is by taking the material conditional elimination, but we would need to get A first, the antecedent. But lo and behold, we're assuming for negation introduction that A is in fact the case. So that means we can actually use conditional elimination to get B out. So we can get B by conditional elimination. And let me make sure to remember these lines. Okay, so we get the conditional elimination from 1 and from 5. Okay. And once we have B, we can then get D. So we'll write line 7 here. And we get that again by conditional elimination from line 2 up here. And from line 6. So remember, we always have to cite 2 lines if we're going to be using the conditional elimination. And now we can use reiteration, right? So we should make use of that rule. So we have line 8 right here. So we get not D, and that's by reiteration. Remember, reiteration just basically says, look, if you've shown something before, you can use it again later. And remember, these are actually accessible within this scope line here. Because this main scope line is said to be open, right? So we haven't closed it off yet. And that's why we can actually go back and access anything that is in the open, scope line. So we reiterate that from line 3. And now we have a contradiction, right? We have D and not D. And that's exactly what the elimination rule was. That's exactly what we needed in order to be able to introduce the negation. So now we actually can go here to line 9, and we can say that this is by negation introduction. And again here, we need to cite this whole subderivation that we did. And the subderivation started with the auxiliary assumption A. Maybe, I don't remember if I said this or not, but A was our auxiliary. Man, this thing writes so slowly sometimes. Alright, so that's our auxiliary assumption. And this is our sub derivation, right? So this whole bit from line 5 to line 8. This is our sub derivation. Okay, come on. There we go, subderivation. Okay, so we need to use in our justification, we need to cite this whole subderivation. So that will be lines 5 to 8, and let me just make that clear. Okay, so that's an example of using negation introduction, but we're not quite done yet, right? Because we actually need to derive this conjunction. But this last step is pretty easy now because we have not A, and we also have M up here, and M is definitely accessible from here because we're on the main scope line. So as our last step then, we use 10, and we can say not A and M, and we do that by conjunction introduction. And the lines we cite for that are 9 and 4. Those are the 2 lines we use. Okay, so that covers negation introduction, negation elimination, and an example thereof.